Hi, my name is Daniel Olshansky. I'm an intern here on the Android team at Google, and today I'll be talking about some ListView animation insertions. So in this specific demo, what we're going to be doing is adding a new object to the 0th index of the data set associated with the ListView, and then animating that cell downwards into it. As that's going to happen, all the other items in the ListView are going to make space for the new cell, animate downwards as the new cell animates back in, and then just as a cool little extra part to the animation, we're going to have an image that's part of the cell animate into its correct location as the new element is being added to it. Some of the important things to know for this animation, some of the few tricks and problems I encountered, is the fact that when you change the data set, some of the objects that you may need may no longer be available after layout has occurred. So what you need to do is you need to take a snapshot of all the items before you modify the data set, so that after you modify the data set, if you no longer have a reference to some of these items, you can still animate them out of the bounds of the list view, because you won't need them after that anymore. So jumping straight into the demo, all we have here is a button and a little round view to its left. The list view is completely empty. Clicking add row, animate creates a new cell and animates it downwards. And we can add as many elements as we want. They'll start looping. And as you can see, it animates downwards, and all the elements in the list view underneath animate down as that happens. You can, of course, scroll the list if you want to. But the interesting thing to note as well is that even though each of these images is part of the data set associated with that item in the list, with that exact cell, what we're doing is animating the image from outside the bounds of the list view into its correct location in the list view, where it then stays and persists as you scroll the list view afterwards. So then, looking at the code, we can go into Insertion ListView, which is an object that extends ListView where you can insert these new items. And after a lot of boilerplate code that you can look over later, all the main logic happens in add row. So firstly, what we need to do here is first get a reference to our adapter, and afterwards what I'm going to do is keep track of the bounds and the drawables of all the items that are in my list before the data set change took place. So I'm gonna loop through all my visible cells, and I'm gonna take a screenshot of every single cell. I'm gonna store that. I'm also gonna retrieve the bounds of every single cell and store that in a corresponding hash map as well. So now, regardless of whether or not those cells are still there after the data set change has taken place, I'll still have a reference to them. Then when you move down here, I actually add the new object to my data set and add a stable ID corresponding to that thing, corresponding to that item, because in my array adapter, I've specified true for stable ID. So that means I need to make sure that a new stable ID is added to that element. Then I notify dataset change, which will request a layout on behalf of the list view. But since I want this to animate, one of the common tricks that have been used for a lot of these animations is using an onPredraw listener. So once again, on measure and on layout have already been called. All the final values for all the widgets in the list contained within the list view have already been calculated, but have not been drawn to the screen yet. So this is where any custom animations you want to do, you can do them here, since you already have a reference to all the final values. So going into onPredraw, we remove the listener and create a new array list where we're gonna store all our animations. So firstly, since I know that I'm adding a new cell to the 0th index, that's the view that I'm gonna wanna use for a lot of my calculations and animations. I retrieve, and then what I'm creating is creating a copy image view, because I can't actually animate the view that I need from within the cell, from outside the bounds, and put it where I need to. But what I'm going to do is create a new copy image view that has the same content as the cell itself, as the image view in the cell itself. And then I'll just animate it into place and then get rid of it when I don't need it anymore. So when I'm animating a new row, one of the other things I do is just animate the text associated with that cell, fade it in as it animates down. And in regard to the image, there's some math that I need to do to determine where it starts and where it has to end. But after all of that is done, all you need to really know is that the image view in the cell has to be set to invisible while the animation is happening, while the copy image view has to be visible. I use an overshoot interpolator, and scale the X and the Y properties of the image view just to get this little cool popping like effect. And then I animate it into place in the new cell view. And once that's done, I can later at the end of the animation get rid of my copy image view and set the visibility of my normal view back to normal. So scrolling down furthermore, this is once the dataset change has already been modified. So then I'll loop through all my visible children of the list view at this point, and there are going to be two types of children that I'll be working with: those that have a corresponding bounds in the hash map I stored originally, and those that don't. If they do have a corresponding bounds, then what that means is that they were visible in the list view before the animation, and they're also visible in the list view after the animation. So all I need to do is create an object animator that translates it from its old position to its new position. If I don't have that start bounds, then what that means is that this is, in the context of this demo, that there's only one cell that can have this configuration. It means that it wasn't in the list view before, but it is in the list view after. And since we're only inserting one new item into the list view, this has to be the one at the 0th index. And since I also want to animate this, I do a little bit of math, determining what the height is, what the divider height is, and then I do the same thing and animate its translation Y property to get it from where it originally would have been to where I want it to be after the layout. Then, of course, since I don't need these items anymore, I remove them from my hash map. And then scrolling down here, if I loop through a key set of all the items that are left in my hash map, what this means is that these are items that were in the list view prior to the dataset change, but are no longer visible in the list view after the dataset change. So these involve items that have been moved outside the bounds of the list view due to the insertion of the new item. And since these items are no longer contained within the list view container, what I need to do is use the bitmap drawables, which I've captured from before, overlay them on top of my list view, and then animate their bounds as if they were still in the list view. Since I'm animating the bounds, it's important to know that every single time the bounds are changed, I need to invalidate my view in order for that portion of the list view to get updated. And in order to make that a little more efficient, I call invalidate with a rect inside of it, such that I don't re-invalidate the whole list view and redraw the whole thing every single time only one of the bitmap drawables has animated. So I set up those animations for every bitmap drawable, and I also added to this array that I have mcell bitmap drawables, which I will make note of in a second, and I add the animation to my animator set. I animate all this together, and then at the end I do all the default things like make my list view enable again, get rid of make the image view in the actual cell visible again, make the copy image view invisible, and things like that. So now here in dispatch draw, this is where I'm going to use that array of all the bitmap drawables corresponding to the items that disappeared. I'm going to loop through all of them and draw them onto the canvas every single time dispatch draw is called. One of the important things to note here is that I'm checking if the size is 0, just to make sure that there are no extra allocations done using the new Java object for loops. And looping down furthermore, scrolling down furthermore, there's just some checks. I'm checking whether I want to animate in the new image or not. So for example, if I were to scroll down here and then add a row, I'm not at the top, so I'm not going to be animating in that image. Whereas if I'm up here, that new image view will be animating. Down here, there's just some more code of how I'm taking snapshots of the list view cells and how I animate them into place, as well as how I'm getting absolute locations on the screen when I want to know where that extra image view needs to be when I decide where to animate it to. So that's pretty much it to how you can insert new cells and animate their addition to your list view. Thanks.